where vulnerability is a liability, that nobody understands you. How do we take the mask off and finally be vulnerable with ourselves? Hello, everybody. It has been definitely an interesting morning. I have been trying to record this particular video multiple times, and let's see if my mind is correct, that I don't push the wrong button, that me and my radiator don't step on each other's toes, and we'll see if we can get through this. All right. So, what we're going to be talking about is vulnerability. You see, this is a word that sort of has been coming into my sphere, into my presence a lot since the beginning of this year. In fact, it's one of my big goals of showing vulnerability. And I've been seeing it in my comments, and I've been hearing about it through conversations that I walk by on the street. Vulnerability seems to be the buzzword in my sphere right now. So I decided to, number one, do I really know what vulnerability is? So I looked it up. So, all right. Ugh. And yes, I have a physical copy of the dictionary. So, what is vulnerability? Vulnerability is being capable of or susceptible to being wounded or hurt physically or emotionally. It's being susceptible to temptation or corrupt influence. It's to be open to or defenseless against criticism or moral attack. In an instance of a place, it's being open to assault, difficult to defend. Vulnerability. The word vulnerability very much resides in the physical, of being attacked, being able to be wounded, able to be hurt. And us as humans, we definitely don't like that. We don't like to be hurt. So what do we do? When we walk out into the world that we perceive as dangerous, where vulnerability is a liability, we wear a mask. Like we put on armor so we can get through, where the words that one can say, the actions of other people don't hurt us. And these masks that we wear can feel necessary, especially in the world that we live today. It feels necessary. As a woman of color, as a woman, as a African American, as a Black person, I have learned to put on that mask at an extremely young age. I can remember having to defend myself from the name calling and the bad intentions of others as young as kindergarten. Especially being the token, being the only minority, only person of color in many spaces that I inhabit, the mask was essential. But here's the thing, the mask is not only to defend, but the mask can be used to signal that I'm part of the group, even though those thoughts and feelings that that mask portrays may not be my own. And it can be a protective shield. But here's the thing about us humans. We put on that mask and we're outside of our house, our homes, our places of protection more than we are ever at home. And what can happen is that mask can get stuck. It can happen very gradually, that mask just won't come off. I know I've experienced it, and I've seen it in my family. I've seen it among friends, where that mask when they go out to work, or that mask when they go to certain friends or visit certain people, when they come back and they're supposed to be just themselves, they just can't seem to take the mask off. And at that time, a very interesting thing happens when you can't take that mask off. You all of a sudden feel lost, isolated, like you're the only one who feels these feelings in the world, that nobody understands you. It's something that can be so jarring. Some of us recognizes that we all of a sudden couldn't take off the mask, and that is the source of so many crises. You know, those crises. The quarter life crisis, the midlife crisis, that crisis you have when you finally retire. It's the who am I now? And you realize that you have just been an observer in your own life. And at that time, we sort of we flail about trying to find who we are and what we actually do. And what's so funny is that we keep that mask on. We don't look back at ourselves and our vulnerability to find who we are, because that's the core of us. How many times have you met someone or heard stories of someone who was married and had a life crisis, who went off and bought a sports car or started dating much younger partners, just to find themselves 5 years later in the exact same situation that they thought they were running from. They never took off the mask. So how do we take that mask of life off? How do we take the mask off and finally be vulnerable with ourselves? Forget being vulnerable with others around you, being vulnerable with ourselves. The first thing I would suggest to you in developing this vulnerable part of yourself is to create a safe space. It sounds very kumbaya, I guess, creating a safe space for you. But it's important. And just because you live in a house, in an apartment, in a room, doesn't necessarily mean that is your safe space. A space that you can shed your layers and be honest with yourself. And that brings me to the next point, is to get to know yourself. Some people use journals to get to know themselves. Some people use meditations. But peeling back the layers to yourself is not as simple as just taking on one mask. Because the funny thing is, there's more than one mask. You've put on multiple masks, like an onion. And you have to slowly peel off one, and then peel off another, by simply asking why. Why do I do this? Why do I act like this around certain people? Why do I talk this way? And getting right down to the core. You have to be brave to go into this process. You can find things about yourself that are not so pretty, that aren't so holy. And that brings me to my next thing that you need to do, is to accept those thoughts. Accept those parts of you. I, myself, have a huge ego under everything. It's something that sometimes I purposefully push away because I was taught that having an ego, a self-importance about oneself is bad. But I accept it. When I finally accepted my ego, accepted that I have this part of me inside of me that just wants everything to just go my way, I can not let it go, but let it wash over me. Let the feeling wash over me without overtaking me. My fourth tip on becoming more vulnerable with yourself is to push your limits. Pushing your limits and being uncomfortable with what you're finding about yourself. Like I said, it takes real work to take off all those masks. If you can just say, oh, I got a big ego, you haven't done the work. Because inside of us, because we are human, we can have very ugly thoughts. So check inside of you. Sometimes those thoughts are even contradictory to who you feel you are. And then, maybe to just one person, I want you to share just a little bit about yourself. Just a bit. I'm going to add with that shared, with that trusted person, that you put a boundary. Someone doesn't need to share their deepest, darkest parts of themselves in order to be vulnerable. If you feel like your personal thoughts about relationships are something that you don't feel comfortable in sharing with that one trusted person, then don't. You're not ready. But come all the way to that edge. And share that moment. I just talked about dating and vulnerability. And I can't help but say about one of my pet peeves. And it's, to be honest, it's something that we all should think about before we share something vulnerable about ourselves to anyone. Are you looking to get something from this vulnerability? Let that sink in. I have lost a good friend who felt that by showing a very vulnerable part of themselves, that they were entitled of something from me. For men, usually they wanted to sleep with me. For friends, for women, that they were entitled to some deep, vulnerable part of myself. a part of myself that I wasn't comfortable in sharing. Make sure when you share this vulnerability with another that the only thing you're looking for is connection, nothing physical coming back to you. Showing your vulnerability is not weakness. It's a point of strength. And if we can be a little more vulnerable in our everyday life, maybe we can change the world. Thank you for watching this video. If you like it, please like, share, and please subscribe. And let me know if you are wearing a mask and if you're ready to take it off. I'll see you next time.